When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Ronna, and I'm joined tonight by Seanice Austin, whom I asked to come on the show because I wanted to talk about like the economy of our city, and I know she has a lot of experience doing financial planning on a personal level, but also on an organizational level. And I thought it would be really interesting to have a discussion about economic development in New London, which is a little bit of a hot topic. At the City Council meeting a couple weeks ago, tax abatements were approved for a couple of apartment buildings in Fort Trumbull. I know there was a column in the newspaper that was quite critical of it. So it was a little bit more of a controversial City Council issue than happens very often. And this coming Monday, City Council is going to vote on renewal of the City and Town Development Act, which is the state legislation which allows, among other things, the city to give these tax abatements. So we kind of want to talk about not just the tax abatements and are they good or are they bad, whether this is a good, statute to follow or not, but just to be a little bit deliberate and thoughtful about how are we using these incentives and how can we maximize return on all of the public dollars we put into city development. So before we converse much, I'd like to have one slide, and it's the part of the law that gives cities the power to do tax abatements. And I'm not going to read it. It's a lot of words, but that cities may exempt property tax payment for a period up to 20 years. And the one part that struck me when I read it was providing for a payment in lieu of payment or payments in lieu of taxes, or providing the property benefits the city in some other way. So I think that's where I'm going to ask Seanice. And I think that's all we'll really look at the slide, but I did want to point out that it does make a point of saying that the cities and municipalities can expect something from return when they grant these tax abatements to developers. So I know when you were running for office last year, that was one of the issues you talked about and you had done research about. So tell us what you learned.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Ronna, for having me on your show tonight. For those who may not know me, my name is Seanice Austin. I'm a longtime New London resident. I want to share a little bit about my background, and I by no means declare myself as an expert in economic development, but it is an area that I am interested in, and I think that as a city and as a community that we could leverage, regardless of how the vote goes on Monday with City Council, how we move forward as a city so that it benefits all of New London. So my background is I spent 28 years working in higher ed. I retired from the state in 2021 and started my second career as a financial advisor. Prior to being licensed in that area, I was on the city's economic development plan. I was actually the co-chair of that. And during the pandemic, I served as a resident co-chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, along with a bunch of other folks, as well as city officials, to help our city move forward during the pandemic. So I have some ideas, and I'm excited to get into this conversation with you tonight.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming on. And some of the things you found out about how other towns do things was illuminating, because I guess it's almost everywhere, but it seems as though in New London we always assume that, we're great and we know best about everything, and maybe that's universal. But I do think that we don't always get out enough and see how things are done in other places, which might not be as good as what we do, but might give us some fresh ideas. So what are some of the things that you learned?
Sure. So when I was running for city council last year, I was very interested in what was occurring in other cities in terms of large-scale housing projects, because we had several that were going on in New London at that time. And some of the things that I learned from the same developers that built in New London, some of the programs, incentives that they incorporated into their building included things like creating open and green spaces that residents can enjoy. So just visually creating an open lawn, having being very intentional and mindful about the landscaping, creating an urban forest with trees and plants. And I thought that were some key things that we could utilize here in our city, giving developers an outline of what our expectations are. One of the areas that I think we need to grow in as a city is really negotiating with developers beyond them providing housing or a service, but what are other ways that they can engage and be a part of our community? Another thing that developers have done in other cities is they were involved in the small business development in that city. So they created a commercial kitchen that residents can then use, startups can use, that were developing restaurant ideas or that were working from their homes but was a home-based business but needed to have a commercial kitchen. So again, I thought, and they built that right on their site as a part of their housing. So it was co-ops going up in Washington, D.C., and on the street level of the co-op, they built commercial kitchens that can be used by residents in that city. They also contributed to scholarship funds that the Alumni Association for that city's public school system could then utilize and award to cities, to students in that city. So again, these are just creative and innovative ways that we can partner with developers in how, if they are given a tax abatement, how we can then say, these are the services that our city lacks or that we need additional support in, and how they can be a part of that.
And I can imagine that would have the secondary advantage that sometimes I look at these apartment buildings and they look kind of, well, like gated communities. The people who live there might or might not vote. They very likely eat in the restaurants downtown, but I doubt that they're volunteering a lot or getting to know people outside their building.
Actually, I visited one of our newer housing complexes on Howard Street, and we actually learned the opposite, Ronna.
Really?
Yes, and kudos to that development, because their residents have said they want to know how they can engage and be a part of the city. And I think that is wonderful. I think when we are building these large complexes, we have a responsibility as a city to welcome in these new residents. Many of them are young professionals or coming from out of state and other parts of the country, working at some of our larger companies like Pfizer's and EB or at
Or
the hospital.
yeah.
You know, and so I think as a city and as a community, we have a responsibility to welcome them into our home and space
Very
because
true.
they are looking for ways to engage and get involved. So one of the things that I did was reached out to their community manager and talked with them about, you know, local organizations, nonprofits in the city where their residents can volunteer, get active, get engaged, and really be a part of our community. And I think we need to do more of that.
And that is encouraging, and you know, I do want to add on that that development on Howard Street also has an arrangement with the New London Arts Council that they have some apartments at reduced rates for local artists. And to me, that's such a big deal because a lot of the economic development in the city and economic development potential in the city is around the arts.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I think it started because artists who are usually not wealthy could find at one time cheap living space, cheap studio space, cheap performing space. And it's getting harder for those artists, but the people who live in New London still want the artists to be here.
Absolutely. And so that is the tricky part, right? Art can help lead the economic development in our city. And so we need art, our artists, tourism, restaurants, businesses, all together can lead the resurgence of economic development in the city. But we need to think of innovative ways to make all of that accessible for those people to live here, right? Because it's becoming harder and harder for not just artists, but, you know, residents, young people.
There are a lot of people in service-oriented jobs that are very low paying, and we need those people. We need people to do housekeeping in the big, you know, office buildings. We need people stocking our grocery shelves and cashiering, but it's hard for those people to manage to live here.
It's hard. It's hard for those folks to manage to live here. It's hard for families, right, to comfortably afford to live here. So there's a lot of issues that we need to address, and you know, housing affordability, food insecurity, all of those are issues that we need to address that can drive economic development as we are addressing those. One of the things that I think is important is we think about community spaces, thinking about public spaces, whether they're community gardens or parks or just open space. Those are all drivers and incentives to have people come and live here. And so the more that we do, the more that we as a city supports those initiatives, I think we'll have a greater mix of people and just a wealthier community for everyone. And not wealth monetarily, but wealth in all the different areas of when we talk about environmental wealth and health, good housing, good jobs, local employment, all of those things come into play. Workforce development opportunities, education, opportunities for our young people, our youth to have activities because they are often a forgotten demographic group. And also, let's not forget our seniors, right? My mom lives with me now and she is 73. So, you know, finding activities that she enjoys, that engages our elderly community is something that we also need to pay attention to.
Well, I was thinking about two things when you were speaking. One, you know, when cities started dwindling after in the 60s maybe, when the cars were king and the, you know, highway system was being built and people moved to the suburbs, we lost the public commons. And one thing that's really important in cities, I think, that there are spaces that really do belong to everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is necessary, right? And so what we all are, especially with the work that I am doing now in this city, is we are stewards of the land, stewards of public spaces, and we need to have more of them, and we need to have greater accessibility and make everyone feel welcome. The city has done some great things, right? But there was more work to be done. And I think it is important that we engage, just getting back to the legislation, if developers are looking to build in our city and they are being given abatements, tax abatements, then we need to engage them in other ways that they can have impact in our city and require it and come with a plan that requires conversations with a wide range of stakeholders, nonprofits, other businesses, residents, young people, our older residents as well, to share ideas. And we have to have a way to measure what projects will have the greatest impact for our city.
And we'll get into that in just a minute. I wanted to, I don't know, I had sort of a random thought, but when the docks was built on Parcel J, originally the development on that parcel was going to be commercial on the first floor and residential up above.
Right.
And so I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we had a workshop meeting with the developers, and I asked the question, well, why did you decide to do it all residential and, you know, not the commercial on the bottom? And they had a really good answer, which was there are all these empty storefronts right across the street. Instead of competing with them, let's bring some people closer to them to support businesses right, you know, within a block of this development. The city, though, I think didn't do our part of that development. And I'm thinking that sometimes if we made an infrastructure improvement, it might be worth it to a developer even more than a tax break sometimes. So what I said, because I think the then city planner was also at the meeting, was, oh, well, we're promoting this housing as someplace where people who work at EB or at the hospital can walk to work, but they can also walk downtown to all the restaurants
Absolutely.
and the theaters and the galleries and everything. But I said the intersection of Howard Street and Bank Street is one of the worst intersections for pedestrians to cross in the whole city.
Yes, it is.
So here is a parcel that we're promoting as being walkable to everything, and you take your life into your hands once you try to cross the street. So I do think that we dropped the ball, though it is not, you know, things are reversible. It could be fixed again in terms of, I don't know, making Bank Street into a boulevard so people could cross half at a time, or do some traffic calming along Howard so it's not such a speedway. If we want that parcel to have the advantage of being walkable, we have to make it so people feel safe, like crossing the street.
Absolutely, and that is a necessity. I think just creating bike lanes, you know, that was one of the big initiatives, make it a bikeable community. But really addressing the ability to walk safely is so important. I come down Howard Street every day, and it is a road race. You cannot cross the street, but those are things that we can address, right?
The speed limit is 25 miles an hour.
Speed
but
limit
no
is
one goes.
25, but folks are getting to work. We have to have ways of slowing
Right.
down that traffic a little bit. I think we need a traffic light there in the middle
Yeah,
stretch.
maybe narrow some of the lanes to
Yeah.
put a real bike lane in there. And you mentioned trees. You know, I've walked during Sailfest from downtown to Captain Scott's along Howard Street, and it is a hot walk.
It is a hot walk. And, that is one of the advantages of having trees, a tree canopy. It is cooling the environment, cooling the space when you're out walking. And, if your home is placed there, there's less of a need for air conditioning. Or if you're walking, you can just feel the difference when you are under the shade of a tree. So Howard Street definitely would be what I might consider a tree desert street, and that could definitely utilize more trees. But see, this is where we have missed opportunities, right? You mentioned something, Ronna, when we were talking with the developers, and they had decided not to put commercial spaces on their development because there were so many empty storefronts downtown. I think that was a smart decision.
Yeah.
But it was a missed opportunity by the city, because then what we should have said is, you will be a part of helping us develop that space because you guys are the experts. This is what you do.
Yeah.
How can you be involved in developing and helping us develop these empty storefronts and market them? And that would have been a way for us to engage and leverage the expertise of these developers. And why aren't we doing that, right?
And that was one of the developers that I thought they were very smart developers, but I think it was also one that you had researched that had developed in other places and made other accommodations with the city to make some sort of in-kind contribution in return for the
But you have to require
tax.
it, right? Developers are here and they're looking at the bottom line and they're looking at dollars and cents, right? If you don't have written down a requirement, an expectation of them, many of them are not going to jump forward and say, oh, I will, input X amount of dollars into redevelopment of the downtown community because we're building these beautiful housing residents, and our residents are going to need places to go and eat and engage and be a part of the community. We want to be a part of that. We have to require that of them. And I think that's some of the work that as a city that we would need to do. And I would love to be a part of that, right? Be a part of the engagement with the city officials. I'm sure there are many other people that would love to be a part of that as well.
And I think one complaint we have heard is that some of these projects, they come up for approval, and we know that the Recreation Center in Fort Trumbull, there were a lot of public meetings and a lot of focus groups and quite a bit of interaction with the public about what the public wants to see. Mm-hmm. But I don't see that with 90% of the developments. And I'm not sure it is important for every single development, but more than it's done. And it could be a determination that if it's going to be some kind of development that really impacts the community, that we want to hear something from the community, because people who live here, they're not the architects, they're not the landscape architects, they're not the engineers, so they're not going to give the expert advice on that, but they do know about what it feels like to cross this street, or what sort of stores should be in proximity to people who live downtown.
Absolutely. I actually think that community engagement should be a standard when there are community development projects going on that is using taxpayers' dollars, whether it's through an abatement or through other means, yeah, I think that we should, as a community, have public input as a standard. And I would love to see more of that with our economic development projects, large and small, right? One of the things that I learned early on when I was a young girl that my grandmother used to always say is, you teach people how to treat you, right? And so as a city, as we are in this development boom going on right now, we have to teach developers what our expectations are and what our community expects. And the only way that we can do that is we have to hear from the people. We have to hear from the community. And we don't have to have long, drawn out, ongoing meetings. Like, I think the community center was such a hot, emotional topic for the community on so many different levels that I think it required that level of input.
Right.
But I think as a standard, we should have some level of community engagement in the process.
You know, that could kind of transform some of the attitudes in the city too, because when people are excluded until the last day and it's a yes or no vote, the ones who show up are only people who want to complain. If there isn't an avenue to give positive, constructive input, then people will just complain if they don't like it. And sometimes that attitude does kind of erode relationships in the city, people's satisfaction with living here, and just the tone of life here. So involving people more from the start, I think, would have some unintended consequences, perhaps, but we might like to see them.
And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because in order to have a healthy community, any relationship everyone's not going to agree.
Right.
And so we have to not be so emotional or feel personally attacked when someone disagrees with an idea. I think that's important. I think it's important on so many levels. It teaches our young people particularly, because that's who I spend a lot of my work with now, in the art of negotiating and compromise. It teaches about how to think critically and share your perspective, even if it's different than what someone else may want. And I think that's healthy, and I think as a community we should encourage that. Civil engagement, even when we disagree, is perfectly okay.
Yeah, no one really, I think, really expects to get everything they want.
Right.
But
Some people do.
But everyone likes to feel heard.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think that's maybe come to a point on some things that people don't always feel heard. Well, now, and I'm not really up on what the plans are, but a couple people have talked to me recently about, the collapse of the First Church and, what kind of spectacular thing we could do with that property right next door to City Hall. Housing, yes, but can we do something that doesn't just look like a generic building, but that's kind of becomes a new landmark?
Right.
And I do think there is an opportunity, because that's also something that, in a different way from the community center, but that people feel kind of an emotional attachment. It was part of the skyline for so long. Now it isn't. What's going to happen? We probably don't want just a generic looking building.
Or a parking lot.
Or a parking lot.
Because that's a need downtown, even though there are some parking structures there, just having a need to park closer, people. So this is where having a checkpoint system, right? When we assess what can be done, the potential for a proposed policy or structure or what we're doing in the community, if we start putting together a system of evaluating that meets the needs of our community, that kind of takes the emotion out of it, and we're being very systematic in how we're assessing that. Now, that's not the only way to review things, but I think it's a starting point, or it can be a part of the process.
Yeah.
Having community conversations definitely should also be a part of something like that, because having a church and deciding where it brought people together, people are going to be emotionally charged around what now happens with that parcel.
Yeah, and it's in such a conspicuous spot. So talk about the scorecard that you that you developed last year, I think.
I did. So when I was running for city council, I was, it was new to me. This is my first time running for elected office, and I'm the kind of person that likes to think of ways that we can look at something objectively, right? And the city policy scorecard, I created 9 categories. And the 9 categories are different ways that we can determine a project's impact on our community and whether it aligns with what we say is important to us. So looking at things like equity and inclusion, the economic impact, does this support economic growth, job creation in our community, the environmental impact, how are factors like air quality, water quality, or sustainability is being impacted by this project or policy proposal. Community engagement, we've talked about that, and why that is important. Long-term impact. I think oftentimes we focus so much on the immediate goals or the immediate needs, and we don't project and really think about the long-term impact. Budgets, obviously, I understand that things cost, and we need to be mindful of the budgetary constraints or ways that we are not bringing in revenue, right?
Sometimes when we think about budgeting, we don't think about what the return on our investment is going to be. And,
right.
And we should think more of that.
Absolutely.
If we're buying things to upgrade our houses, there are some things, you buy a big home theater, it probably won't have the same return on investment as making sure your roof is going to last for 30 years. It might be the same cost.
Yep.
Or the roof might cost more in the short run, but it will sure be of service for more years to come.
Absolutely. So just assessing that. Health and safety, we were just talking about how they built the housing development on Howard Street, and there was no real assessment of the safety measures for pedestrians. We're saying people can walk to work, but can you safely walk to work in that area? Can you cross the street?
Yeah.
No, there are a lot of challenges facing that. So in the last area, and to me, for many cities in our country, looking at if this measure or policy has any historical redress and community advancement. When we think about marginalized communities, we think about the long-term impact of urban renewal, and some of those policies that happened during that time period. How can we now play a part in creating redress to those communities that were negatively impacted? And I think we have to think about all 9 of those measures when we are considering a project proposal or voting on a new piece of legislation or policy for our city.
And I want to like drill into that last one. I noticed that in your point system, that one has the most points assigned
Yes.
to it. And, you know, it's become quite popular these days to go to events and hear, you know, a land declaration. You know, we acknowledge, land acknowledgement that this land belonged to a certain indigenous tribe or a certain group of people, and we acknowledge it. And I feel funny about that. I mean, it's okay to admit it, but what are we going to do to start undoing the damage? Obviously, we're not going to undo the damage all at once overnight, but I think we need more concrete steps than just saying the words, you know?
Absolutely. And I totally agree. When we do land acknowledgments, I also, it is important to me that we also acknowledge that it wasn't just the land, but it was also the labor, the stolen labor that went into developing that land and creating, you know, this country. And I think that's an acknowledgement that we don't do. But more importantly, what are we doing about it? Where is the redress? And how are we making that a part of our standard decision making whenever possible? Will it be a part of every development project or every policy? No, it will not. But if we have it as a part of our conscious mind as we're evaluating projects, we will start to make headway. If we totally ignore it, which we have done now, and just play lip service, then we'll never have redress. And quite honestly, we'll never have healing and reconciliation. And that's, you know, one of the main drivers of that. And the reason why it has more points is because it has an elevated need, I think.
I think one of the problems is it's actually happened more than once.
Right.
And so it's not just a single insult and damage done once. You look back, generations of slaves who did the work, were the property, didn't own the property, and often could not. They were the farmers, they were often the cooks, but they couldn't actually get jobs doing what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So lost land and lost labor. But
Stolen labor.
Yes. And then you see a city like New London, there were deed restrictions that kept many people who were not, white Europeans out of neighborhoods. That got relaxed a little at one point, that people from the Indian subcontinent and Jewish people like me could start infiltrating those areas. We were deemed white enough, but there were parts of the city were off limits.
Yes.
Through deed restrictions.
And not only just through deed restrictions, we also have to remember that there were social norms, unwritten social norms, that also prevented, that upheld these systems as well. And so I think that's often forgotten because they were unwritten rules and policies and might have been contrary to what was legal, but it was definitely done and impacted people. And that's the thing with systems, right? When we talk about systemic oppression, it's a compounding. It's never just one thing or one issue even. It's a compounding of issues that impact groups, particular groups, and we have to start making it a part of what we do in creating redress. The same level of intentionality that went into creating systemic oppressions is the same level of intentionality that needs to go into dismantling and changing. We have to be intentional.
And, as recently as, urban renewal, they were demolishing neighborhoods near Ocean Beach for new development. They were demolishing neighborhoods that had Black ownership and regular working people's ownership. And so many people who had their labor, stolen a couple generations before, couldn't own land, finally owned land, and then lost their land. And I can't help but think we should have learned the lesson that that's not a good idea. I know Jane Jacobs, in her amicus brief, the Kilo case, the one sentence I remember is that when you have these big development plans, one thing that that the planners usually don't think about but need to be is not only what are you gaining if you implement this plan, but what might you be losing.
Exactly.
And I don't know if that's on your checklist or not. Actually, I have a slide that just summarized the 9 points so you can see just how different, how they cover different aspects of the decision making. Equity and inclusivity, economic impact, environmental impact, community engagement, legal and ethical compliance, long-term impact, budgetary impact, health and safety, and historical redress. So that's the list.
And this is a working document. And so, bringing more people to the table to talk about this, what's missing? What can we add? What can we take away? Definitely, as a community, this is a working document, and it takes more than just one person to create a standard, right, for the community.
Right.
So this is open to community review and community input, and I would love and welcome that, as well as from the city. The city, the government needs to be partners in a lot of what it is that we're doing. They are partners, and so hearing from them as well, because they have a perspective sometimes that those of us who don't work in government don't always have, right? They're trying to balance things as well. And so I think it's important that all of the entities come together to work together in order to move our city forward.
And one thing that this checklist kind of bypasses, and I'm happy to see that, is I read through some of the City and Town Development Act, and it's very geared towards large projects. And I think sometimes bigger is better, but sometimes it isn't, and we're not always good at differentiating that. A few years ago, it was pre-COVID, so it was probably like 7 years ago, I was invited to lead a Jane Jacobs Day walk, and all three of us who were leading a walk, Maggie Redfern led a walk about urban trees, and Nicole Thomas led one about showing some of the old houses in the Williams Park neighborhood. And I chose economic development on Broad Street. So without communicating at all, we all chose the same neighborhood, which was really interesting.
Yes.
But thinking, so I did a little bit of math, it was really just arithmetic, about how different properties were valued. And what I found was in the stretch of Broad Street between Hempstead Street and Connecticut Avenue, there is a Dunkin' Donuts. It's on 3/4 of an acre. And on about a little more, like 4/5 of an acre, there were like 5 restaurants. There's, Shanghai Garden and Empire Pizza and Little Galapagos and Cultura. And in that strip, near Hempstead Street, there's also a food mart, H&H. and the Peruvian restaurant on the corner of Connecticut. And altogether, they're on 4/5 of an acre, and they're in total assessed for taxation of $1,900,000 approximately. No, about what? Yeah, and the Dunkin' Donuts is assessed at about $1,100,000. So we get more tax revenue from the 5 little joints than we do from the Dunkin' Donuts.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And that's, again, something that we need to pay attention to. When you have a city that has historical areas, that has a business district, and then you have businesses that are outside of that, we have to look at the taxation of those businesses versus, and the size of their lots, versus those that might be within the downtown core, or may have been there longer, and so their assessment might be different, or they may be a larger company versus a small business. Those are all the things that we have to kind of look at.
And Broad Street is interesting because it developed over hundreds of years,
Right.
and the parts that are close to the core of downtown were developed in a different way. Parking might be an issue, although some have lots. All of them put together, including Dunkin' Donuts and including the Puerto Rican restaurant farther down towards Coleman Street, Mi Familia, they still have much more value per acre than the Family Dollar store, which has a huge parking lot. Well, we have 5 minutes left, and I thought what we could do to end up sort of is to let people know that the City and Town Development Act is being presented to City Council on Monday, October 7th. I received a copy of the proposal from the city clerk. He was very nice. He printed it out for me. It's supposed to be on the website. I could not find it. And I'm usually pretty good at internet search. I found the one from 5 years ago, but not the current one.
And the vote is Monday?
Monday for renewal for 5 years. And I'm, as I said in the beginning, I'm not encouraging a yes vote or a no vote, but I think people need to discuss a little bit more than we usually do how we're using it, maybe look back at all the different instances when we did use this act to give tax abatements and see what our return was on those. And maybe that would give us an idea of what kind of projects would be most worthwhile to do this for in the future.
That would be great for the city or the city councilors to provide that, because the community would need to know if we have received a return on our investment. The thinking would probably lean toward we have not. And again, this could be an opportunity for us to define under what parameters, what are the expectations that we have of developers that we are giving a tax abatement to? What are the in-kind other ways that they can contribute to our city? So we need to define that. And that does not mean no money at all. They might put money into other areas as opposed to, paying a tax or using their knowledge and expertise, or just a wide variety of ways that we could leverage that relationship. But we have to outline it.
And since we do have 3 minutes, I want to make a little bit of a pitch. There is an economist named Art Rolnick. He, for many years, was a vice president of research for the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And he is skeptical of tax abatements for community development, and most of his work has not been around housing. It's when communities choose to put a sports stadium in and put their, all their eggs in a sports stadium basket. He's in Minneapolis, so he's sensitive to that. But he said, when you're thinking about economic development, think also about your human capital. Put money in education.
Absolutely.
Your return might be better than putting it into a new building. So I think we talked a little bit about thinking outside the box, but this is one other dimension that we can think about economic development in a very much broader way.
The key thing is we have to continue to have these conversations, right? This
Right.
this isn't just a one-time conversation. Let's continue to talk. Let's bring in others, right? Let's develop a plan that we can then share with City Council and get their feedback. Yeah, let's continue to have this conversation. It's our city, right? It belongs to the community, and so we just have to be more civically engaged.
And the very final thing, on Monday, city council meetings are on the third floor in City Hall and council chambers. If you want to speak, get there before 7 p.m. so you will be able to speak in public comment. It's always interesting to watch. And, New London has a lot of vacancies on boards and commissions. And since we're talking about civic engagement,
Yes.
if you look at the list of boards and commissions in New London, there are a lot of vacancies. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we're supposed to have 7 members and 3 alternates, and we have 7 members and 1 alternate, which usually is okay, but during some seasons when people are taking vacations,
Yeah.
you're running kind of sparse. So these commissions, for whatever your interest is, there is a commission that might fit it.
Exactly. And I will say that Mayor Passero has reached out to a wide network to encourage our members and networks to put in applications to join these commissions. So there is efforts that's being made to encourage more and more people to join the commission. They're part of the decision making for the city, right?
Yeah. And it's good to find out. It's an easy way to get involved and to learn about and have some influence on some of the things
Absolutely.
that are happening. Well, thank you, Seanice, for coming on. It was a little bit short notice that it suddenly
worries.
occurred to me, oh my gosh, we want to talk about economic development because it's been such a hot topic. But I really enjoyed it, and I do think there should be follow-up, and hope there will be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Ronna.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and for all of you, we'll be back next week.
All right.
When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall,